Indian Economy by Ramesh Singh. Chapter 16. International Economic Organizations and India. If, as T.S. Eliot said, that humankind cannot bear too much reality, recent events suggest that the world cannot bear too much globalization either. International Monetary System. The International Monetary System, IMS, refers to the customs, rules, instruments, facilities, and organizations facilitating international, external payments. Sometimes the IMS is also referred to as an international monetary order or regime. IMS can be classified according to the way in which exchange rates are determined, i.e., fixed currency regime, floating currency regime or managed exchange regime, and the form foreign reserves take, i.e., gold standard, a pure judiciary standard or a gold exchange standard. An IMS is considered good if it fulfills the following two objectives in an impartial manner. 1. Maximizes the flow of foreign trade and foreign investments, and 2. Leads to an equitable distribution of the gains from trade among the nations of the world. The evaluation of an IMS is done in terms of adjustment, liquidity, and confidence which it manages to wield. Adjustment. It refers to the process by which the balance of payment, BOP, crisis of the nations of the world, or the member nations, are corrected. A good IMS tries to minimize the cost of BOP and time for adjustment for the nations. Liquidity. It refers to the amount of foreign currency reserves available to settle the BOP crisis of the nations. A good IMS maintains as much foreign reserves to mitigate such crises of the nations without any inflationary pressures on the nations. Confidence. It refers to the faith the nations of the world should show that the adjustment mechanism of the IMS is working adequately and that foreign reserves will retain their absolute and relative values. This confidence is based on the transparent knowledge information about the IMS. Bretton Woods development. As the powerful nations of the world were hopeful of a new and more stable world order with the emergence of the UNO, on the contrary, they were also anxious for a more homogeneous world financial order. After the Second World War, the representatives of the USA, the UK and 42 other, total 44 countries, nations met at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, USA in July 1944 to decide a new international monetary system. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank, with its first group institution IBRD, were set up together, popularly called as the Bretton Woods Twins, both having their headquarters in Washington, D.C., USA. International Monetary Fund. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, came up in 1944, whose articles came into force on the 27th December 1945 with the main functions as exchange rate regulation, purchasing short-term foreign currency liabilities of the member nations from around the world, allotting special drawing rights, SDRs, to the member nations, and the most important one as the bailer to the member economies in the situation of any BOP crisis. The main functions of the IMF are as given below. 1. To facilitate international monetary cooperation. 2. To promote exchange rate stability and orderly exchange arrangements. 3. To assist in the establishment of a multilateral system of payments and the elimination of foreign exchange restrictions. And 4. To assist member countries by temporarily providing financial resources to correct maladjustment in their balance of payments, BOPs. The Board of Governors of the IMF consists of one governor and one alternate governor from each member country. For India, Finance Minister is the ex officio governor, while the RBI governor is the alternate governor on the board. The day-to-day management of the IMF is carried out by the managing director, who is chairman, currently, Ms. Christine Lagarde, of the Board of Executive Directors. Board of Executive Directors consists of 24 directors appointed or elected by member countries or group of countries, is the executive body of the IMF. India is represented at the IMF by an executive director, currently Arvind Virmani, who also represents 3 other countries in India's constituency, viz. Bangladesh, Sri Lanka and Bhutan. India's quota and ranking. IMF reviews members' quotas once in every 5 years, last done in December 2010. Here, India consented for its quota increase. After this, India's quota, together with its 3 constituency countries, has increased to 2.76% from 2.44%, and it has become the 8th, from 11th, largest quota-holding country among the 24 constituencies. In absolute terms, India's quota has increased to SDR 13,114.4 million, from SDR 5,821.5 million, which is an increase of approximately US $11.5 billion or 56,000 crore rupees. While 25% of the quota is to be paid in cash, i.e., in reserve currency, the balance 75% can be paid in securities. Once a member nation has signed the EFF, Extended Fund Facility, agreement with the IMF, borrowing can be done by the member nation. India signed this agreement in the fiscal 1981-82. India has been borrowing from the IMF due to critical balance of payment (BOP) situations, once between 1981 to 84, SDR 3.9 billion, and next during 1991, SDR 3.56 billion. India is now a contributor to the IMF as it participates in the Financial Transactions Plan (FTP) of the IMF since September 2002. At this time, India was in strong balance of payment situation and in a comfortable forex reserves position. Current US or EU financial crisis, challenges regarding international payments. The recent financial crisis of the US and the EU nations have raised the questions of the challenges of international payments once again. At this crucial juncture, the world seems tossing the idea of a reserved currency for all international payments, as if the famous Keynesian idea of such a currency, banker, is going for a kind of revival. The banker was a supranational currency that John Maynard Keynes and E.F. Schumacher conceptualized in the years 1940 to 42, which the United Kingdom proposed to introduce after the Second World War. The proposed currency was be used in international trade as a unit of account within a multilateral barter clearing system, the International Clearing Union, which would also have to be founded. The banker was to be backed by barter and its value expressed in weight of gold. However, this British proposal could not prevail against the interests of the United States, which at the Bretton Woods Conference established the US dollar as the world key currency. Milton Friedman, the famous US economist, insisted that Keynes' theories were incorrect, who believed that inflation was highly destructive and that only monetary policy could control it, and that monetary policy is a heavyweight instrument and cannot be used for short-term economic management. Since the outbreak of the financial crisis in 2008, Keynes' proposal has been revived in a speech delivered in March 2009 entitled Reform the International Monetary System, Zhu Xiaochun, the governor of the People's Bank of China called Keynes' banker approach far-sighted and proposed the adoption of International Monetary Fund (IMF) special drawing rights (SDRs) as a global reserve currency as a response to the financial crisis of 2007 to 2010. He argued that a national currency was unsuitable as a global reserve currency because of the Triffin dilemma, the difficulty faced by reserve currency issuers in trying to simultaneously achieve their domestic monetary policy goals and meet other countries' demand for reserve currency. A similar analysis was articulated in the report of the United Nations experts on reforms of the international monetary and financial system as well as in a recent IMF study. World Bank. The World Bank (WB) group today consists of 5 closely associated institutions propitiating the role of development in the member nations in different areas. A brief account is as follows. IBRD. The International Bank for Reconstruction and Development is the oldest of the WB institutions, which started functioning 1945 in the area of reconstruction of the war-ravaged regions, World War II, and later for the development of the middle-income and creditworthy poorer economies of the world. Human development was the main focus of the developmental lending with a very low interest rate, 1.55% per annum. The areas of focus being agriculture, irrigation, urban development, healthcare, family welfare, dairy development, etc. It commenced lending for India in 1949. After the process of reforms started in the World Bank, in 2010, India was allotted additional shares in IBRD, now holds 56,739 shares amounting to US $6,844.7 million. With this, India emerged as the 7th largest shareholder, up from the 11th position in IBRD with voting power of 2.91%, up from 2.77%. IDA. The International Development Agency, IDA, which is also known as the soft window of the WB, was set up in 1960 with the basic aim of developing infrastructural support among the member nations, long-term lending for the development of economic services. Its loans, known as credits, are extended mainly to economies with less than $895 per capita income. The credits are for a period of 35 to 40 years, interest-free, except for a small charge to cover administrative costs. Repayment begins after a 10-year grace period. In the beginning there was a human angle to its lending, but now there remain no hard and fast differences between the purposes for the IBRD and IDA lending. Every year developing nations make enough diplomatic attempts to carve out maximum loan disbursal for themselves. India had been the biggest beneficiary of the IDA support. The total support, IBRD plus IDA, for India had been $91.81 billion till date. Since 2015, India did not avail any financial support from the IDA as it graduated from the agency in the financial year 2014. IFC. The International Finance Corporation, IFC, was set up in 1956, which is also known as the private arm of the WB. It lends money to private sector companies of its member nations. The interest rate charged is commercial but comparatively low. There are many attractive features of IFC's lending. It finances and provides advice for private-public ventures and projects in partnership with private investors and, through its advisory work, helps governments of the member nations to create conditions that stimulate the flow of both domestic and foreign private savings and investment. It focuses on promoting economic development by encouraging the growth of productive enterprises and efficient capital markets in its member countries. It participates in an investment only when it can make a special contribution that complements the role of market investors as a foreign financial investor, FFI. It also plays a catalytic role, stimulating and mobilizing private investment in the developing world by demonstrating that investments there too can be profitable. We have seen a great upsurge in the IFC investments in India, which has undoubtedly strengthened the foreign investors' confidence in the Indian economy. MIGA. The Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, MIGA, set up in 1988, encourages foreign investment in developing economies by offering insurance, guarantees, to foreign private investors against loss caused by non-commercial, i.e., political, risks, such as currency transfer, expropriation, war and civil disturbance. It also provides technical assistance to help countries disseminate information on investment opportunities. ICSID. The International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes, ICSID, set up in 1966, is an investment dispute settlement body whose decisions are binding on the parties. It was established under the 1966 Convention on the Settlement of Investment Disputes between states and nationals of other states. Though recourse to the center is voluntary, but once the parties have agreed to arbitration, they cannot withdraw their consent unilaterally. It settles the investment disputes arising between the investing foreign companies and the host countries where the investments have been done. India is not its member. That is why the Enron issue was out of its purview. It is believed that being signatory to it encourages the foreign investment flows into an economy, but risks independent sovereign decisions, too. Asian Development Bank. Set up in 1966 with 31 founding members, India being one of them, today, by March 2017, it has grown to encompass 67 members, of which 48 are from Asia and Pacific and 19 from outside. It has its headquarters situated at Manila, Philippines. The purpose of the bank is to foster economic growth and cooperation in the region of Asia and the Far East and to contribute to economic development of the developing member countries, collectively and individually. The 6 functions of the bank are as clubbed below: 1. Promoting investment, public and private, and harmonious regional development with special regard to less developed member countries. 2. Coordinating development policies and plans, on request. Promoting intra-regional trade, providing technical assistance in financing, execution, and project proposals. 3. Cooperating with the UNO and other international institutions, public and private, and undertaking other activities, and provide other services advancing its purpose. India's subscription to the bank's capital stock is 6.331% with a voting power of 5.363%, as per the ADB Annual Report, 2018. India started borrowing from ADB's Ordinary Capital Resources, OCR, in 1986. The bank's lending has been mainly in the energy, transport and communications, finance, industry and social infrastructure sectors. The bank has extended technical assistance to India in addition to loans from its OCR window. The technical assistance provided includes support for institutional strengthening, effective project implementation and policy reforms as well as for project preparation. India holds the position of Executive Director on the Board of Directors of the bank. Its constituency comprises India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Laos PDR and Tajikistan. The Finance Minister is India's governor on the Board of Governors of the Asian Development Bank and Secretary, EA, is the alternate governor. OECD. The roots of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, Paris, go back to the rubble of Europe after World War II. Determined to avoid the mistakes of their predecessors, in the wake of World War I, European leaders realized that the best way to ensure lasting peace was to encourage cooperation and reconstruction, rather than punish the defeated. The Organization for European Economic Cooperation, OEC, was established in 1947 to run the US-financed Marshall Plan for reconstruction of a continent ravaged by war. By making individual governments recognize the interdependence of their economies, it paved the way for a new era of cooperation that was to change the face of Europe. Encouraged by its success and the prospect of carrying its work forward on a global stage, Canada and the US joined OEC members in signing the new OECD Convention on 14 December 1960. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, was officially born on 30 September 1961, when the convention entered into force. Other countries joined in, starting with Japan in 1964. Today, 35 OECD member countries worldwide regularly turn to one another to identify problems, discuss and analyze them, and promote policies to solve them. The track record is striking. The US has seen its national wealth almost triple in the 5 decades since the OECD was created, calculated in terms of gross domestic product per head of population. Other OECD countries have seen similar, and in some cases even more spectacular, progress. There are many countries that a few decades ago were still only minor players on the world stage. China, India and Brazil have emerged as new economic giants. Most of the countries that formed part of the former Soviet bloc have either joined the OECD or adopted its standards and principles to achieve the common goals. Russia is negotiating to become a member of the OECD, and now the organization has close relations with Brazil, China, India, Indonesia and South Africa through its Enhanced Engagement Program. Together with them, the OECD brings around its stable 40 countries that account for 80% of world trade and investment, giving it a pivotal role in addressing the challenges facing the world economy. India and OECD. India has got enhanced engagement since 2007, with the body accession membership to it is distinct, though it has potential in future leading to it. The accession process to it is complex and longer, as it involves a series of examinations to assess a country's ability to meet its OECD standards in a wide range of policy areas. Meanwhile, India's relationship with the OECD has developed steadily since 1998, when it joined its Steel Committee, since 2007 being its key partner. Since 2017, India is participating as an associate or participant in 21 OECD bodies and adheres to 9 OECD legal instruments, making it an important contributor to several areas of importance, from corporate governance to fiscal matters to nuclear energy. Furthermore, India plays an active role in OECD's regional activities in Asia together with cooperation on various international fora. World Trade Organization, WTO. The World Trade Organization, WTO, came into being as a result of the evolution of the multilateral trading system, starting with the establishment of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, in 1947. The protracted Uruguay round negotiations spanning the period 1986 to 1994, which resulted in the establishment of the WTO, substantially extended the reach of multilateral rules and disciplines related to trade in goods, and introduced multilateral rules applicable to trade in agriculture, agreement on agriculture, trade in services, general agreement on trade in services, GATS, as well as trade-related intellectual property rights, TRIPS. A separate understanding on WTO dispute settlement mechanism, DSU, and trade policy review mechanism, TPRM, was also agreed upon. The WTO provides a rule-based, transparent, and predictable multilateral trading system. The WTO rules envisage non-discrimination in the form of national treatment and most favored nation, MFN, treatment to India's exports in the markets of other WTO members. National treatment ensures that India's products, once imported into the territory of other WTO members, would not be discriminated vis-à-vis the domestic products in those countries. MFN treatment principle ensures that members do not discriminate among various WTO members. If a member country believes that the due benefits are not accruing to it because of trade measures by another WTO member, which are violative of WTO rules and disciplines, it may file a dispute under the Dispute Settlement Mechanism, DSM, of the WTO. There are also contingency provisions built into WTO rules, enabling member countries to take care of exigencies like balance of payment problems and situations like a surge in imports. In case of unfair trade practices causing injury to the domestic producers, there are provisions to impose anti-dumping or countervailing duties as provided for in the Anti-Dumping Agreement and the Subsidies and Countervailing Measures Agreement. Membership. The present membership of the WTO is 164. The last member to join was Afghanistan, March 2016, after a long negotiation process of 11 years. Other than its members, at present, there are 22 observer governments including Afghanistan, Holy See, Vatican, Iran, Iraq, Libya, Uzbekistan, etc. As per the guidelines of the WTO, observers, except Holy See, must start accession negotiations within 5 years of becoming observers. Ministerial conferences. Ministerial conferences are the highest decision-making body of the WTO, which is to meet at least every 2 years. These conferences bring all members together, which are countries or separate customs territories. During these conferences, decisions on all matters can be taken. By now, there have been 11 such conferences of the body. The 11th Ministerial Conference took place in Buenos Aires, Argentina, December 10 to 13, 2017. The 12th Ministerial Conference, MC12, is decided to be held in June 2020 in Nur-Sultan, Kazakhstan, exact dates yet to be decided. Normally, this conference should take place by late 2019, but it has been postponed by few months due to several reasons: lack of commitment shown by the developed countries to the WTO, especially the USA and the UK busy with its Brexit process, increased tension between the USA and China on the trade issues, nationalistic and protectionist sentiments among several important member countries. Previous conferences: Nairobi, 15 to 19 December 2015, Bali, 3 to 6 December 2013, Geneva, 15 to 17 December 2011, Geneva, 30th November to 2nd December 2009, Hong Kong, 13 to 18 December 2005, Cancun, 10 to 14 September 2003, Doha, 9 to 13 November 2001, Seattle. 30th November to 3rd December 1999, Geneva. 18 to 20 May 1998, and Singapore. 9 to 13 December 1996. Nairobi Negotiations and India. The WTO held its 10th Ministerial Conference in Nairobi, Kenya during 15 to 19 December 2015. This was the first such meeting to be hosted by an African nation. The outcomes of the conference, referred to as the Nairobi Package, are as given below. 1. The Nairobi Declaration reflects divergence amongst the WTO membership on the relevance of reaffirming the Doha Development Agenda, DDA, as the basis of future negotiations. This was despite the fact that India, along with many other developing countries, from groups such as the G33 LDCs and the Africa Group, wanted a reaffirmation of the mandate of the Doha round. While reflecting that there are divergences, the Ministerial Declaration also notes the strong commitment of all members to advance negotiations on the remaining Doha issues. It records that WTO work would maintain development at its center. It also reaffirms that provisions for special and differential treatment shall remain integral. 2. As the future of the Doha round appeared in doubt, India sought and succeeded in obtaining a reaffirmative ministerial decision on public stockholding for food security purposes, honoring both the Bali Ministerial and General Council decisions. The decision commits members to engage constructively in finding a permanent solution to this issue. 3. A large group of developing countries has long been seeking an SSM, Special Safeguard Mechanism, for agricultural products. In order to ensure that this issue remains on the agenda of future discussion in the WTO, India negotiated a ministerial decision which recognizes that developing countries will have the right to have recourse to an SSM as envisaged in the mandate. Members will continue to negotiate the mechanism in dedicated sessions of the Committee on Agriculture in special session. 4. It was also agreed to the elimination of agricultural export subsidies. Subject to the preservation of special and differential treatment for developing countries, such as a longer phase-out period for transportation and marketing export subsidies for exporting agricultural products. Developed countries have committed to removing export subsidies immediately, except for a few agricultural products, and developing countries will do so by 2018. 5. Developing countries will keep the flexibility to cover marketing and transport subsidies for agriculture exports until the end of 2023, and the LDCs and net food importing developing countries would have additional time to cut such export subsidies. The ministerial decision contains disciplines to ensure that other export policies are not used as a disguised form of subsidies. These disciplines include a. Terms to limit the benefits of financing support to agriculture exporters. B. Rules on state enterprises engaging in agriculture trade. And C. Disciplines to ensure that food aid does not negatively affect domestic production. 6. One of the decisions adopted extends the relevant provision to prevent evergreening of patents in the pharmaceuticals sector. This decision would help in maintaining an affordable and accessible supply of generic medicines. 7. India supported outcomes on issues of interest to LDCs, including enhanced preferential rules of origin for LDCs and preferential treatment for LDC services providers. India already offers duty-free, quota-free access scheme to all LDCs, which provides a comprehensive coverage with simple, transparent, and liberal rules of origin. India has also recently, late 2015, made available substantial and commercially meaningful preferences in services to LDCs. 8. The issue of fisheries subsidies could not be resolved due to lack of consensus. Including India, several other countries, China, Egypt, South Africa, Korea and Saudi Arabia, etc., were opposed to disciplining rules on fisheries subsidies due to the lack of clarity. 9. On the issue of anti-dumping, India strongly opposed a proposal that would give greater power to the WTO's anti-dumping committee to review members' practices. Due to lack of convergence, no outcome was achieved. 10. A group of 53 WTO members, including both developed and developing countries, agreed on the timetable for implementing a deal to eliminate tariffs on 201 information technology products. This duty-free market will be available to all WTO members, even to India, which was not party to the agreement. 11. As regards the introduction of other new issues. For discussion, the declaration acknowledges the differences in views and states that any decision to launch negotiations multilaterally on such issues would need to be agreed by all members. The rich, developed countries wanted the introduction of new issues of their interests, which included global value chain, e-commerce, competition laws, labor, environment, and investments. Buenos Aires Conference and India. The 11th Ministerial Conference, MC11, of World Trade Organization, WTO, which took place in Buenos Aires, Argentina, 10 to 13 December 2017, ended without a ministerial declaration or any substantive outcome, though the unanimous view was that it was extremely well conducted with complete openness and transparency, and the process afforded everyone ample opportunity to express their views. Major developments, as per the Economic Survey 2017-18, at the conference were as given below. In the run-up to MC11, decisions were expected on a permanent solution on food security and other agriculture issues. Unfortunately, the strong position of one of the member, the USA, against agricultural reforms based on current WTO mandates and rules led to a deadlock without any outcome on agriculture or even a work program for the next 2 years. However, the existing mandates and decisions ensure that work will go forward and members will continue to work on issues such as the permanent solution on public stockholding for food security. Purposes: Agricultural Special Safeguard Mechanism and Agricultural Domestic Support. Some of the other decisions that were taken included a work program on disciplines on fisheries subsidies with a view to arriving at a decision by MC12. It was also decided to continue with the non-negotiating mandate of the existing work program on e-commerce. On new issues like investment facilitation, MSMEs, gender and trade, which lacked a mandate or consensus, ministerial decisions were not taken forward. India stood firm during the conference on its stand on the fundamental principles of the WTO, including multilateralism, rule-based consensual decision-making, an independent and credible dispute resolution and appellate process, the centrality of development, which underlies the Doha Development Agenda, DDA, and special and differential treatment for all developing countries. Meanwhile, India continues to negotiate with the countries with similar views at many ministerial conferences to reach a consensus on the issues which derailed the Buenos Aires Conference of the trade body. India and WTO. India has been always in favor of a multilaterally trading world, an effective and transparent dispute settlement arrangement in the WTO. Some recent engagements of India with the WTO are being summarized below. In mid-May, 13 to 14 May 2019, India hosted a WTO ministerial meeting of trade ministers in New Delhi on the concerns of the 16 developing and 6 least developed countries. An outcome document was released in the meeting, which lays out priorities for developing countries in various areas and envisages addressing the challenges being faced by the dispute settlement system of the WTO. India has submitted a paper in the General Council meeting of the WTO, spelling out the following major priorities that are required to be taken into consideration while undertaking reforms in the WTO. A. Preservation of core principles of the multilateral trading system. B. Safeguarding special and differential treatment provisions. C. Resolution of the appellate body crisis. D. Addressing unilateral actions and continuation of negotiations in mandated areas, among others. In particular, India has emphasized that special and differential treatment provisions are essential for better integration of the developing countries in the global trading system. These provisions are at the core of the WTO and must be preserved. In addition, a submission on transparency and notification requirements at the WTO has also been made by India along with other WTO members including Cuba, African Group. The submission outlines that transparency should be a common thread running in all the operations of the WTO. Developing countries, including the least developed countries, who are already resource or capacity constrained, should not be penalized in the name of improving transparency. India has, time and again, underscored the need of a permanent solution in public stockholding for food security programs. There has, however, not been constructive engagement in this area of negotiation. India is also fully engaged in the fisheries subsidies negotiations in the WTO and considers safeguarding the interests of poor, small and artisanal farmers as a priority in the negotiations. The 12th Ministerial Conference of the WTO, MC12, is scheduled to be held in June 2020 in Nur-Sultan, Kazakhstan. Discussions for an outcome at MC12 are underway at various informal ministerial meetings and regular meetings at the WTO. Despite wide divergences among members in the positions taken by them in different areas of negotiation, India is regularly engaging with members with a view to find solutions which addresses the issues of concern to the larger membership of the WTO. Trade facilitation by India. Trade facilitation has been a highly contentious issue related to the multilateral trade and was always prioritized in the WTO negotiations by the member nations. The Trade Facilitation Agreement, TFA, agreed upon by the WTO was ratified by India in April 2016. For its implementation, a National Committee on Trade Facilitation, NCTF, was also set up by the government. In order to achieve cargo release time targets, India undertook a national level time release study, TRS, for the first time in 2019 across multiple locations covering seaports, inland container depots, ICDs, air cargo complex, and integrated checkposts. The intended objectives of the TRS was to assess impact of extent measures to reduce release time, examine extent procedures, technologies, and infrastructure, and administrative concerns, and thereby identify manual processes and physical touchpoints, bottlenecks, and inefficiencies by stakeholders to bring down the overall release time. The major steps taken by India in this regard are as summarized below. In order to optimize the gains of trade facilitation, National Trade Facilitation Action Plan, NTFAP 2017-20, containing specific activities to further ease out the bottlenecks to trade was released in July 2017 with an overall vision of the government to see India as an active facilitator of trade. The NCTF has played an important role in reducing the high cost of imports and exports so as to integrate the country's cross-border trade with the global value chain. As a result, India has improved its ranking from 143 in 2016 to 68 in 2019 under the indicator Trading Across Borders, which is monitored by World Bank in determining the overall ranking of around 190 countries in its Ease of Doing Business report. The key initiatives contributing to reduction in overall cargo release time and consequent improvement in ranking of India under the indicator Trading Across Borders include Single Window Interface for Facilitating Trade, SWIFT, enablement of post-clearance audit, self-e-sealing through RFID tag by exporters, requirement of only 3 mandatory documents for import or export, e-Sanchit for lodging supporting documents online, tracking of imported cargo clearance time through Indian Customs, Ease of Doing Business Dashboard, ICE-, 24x7 online customs clearance facility, elimination of merchant overtime fees, launch of Atithi mobile app for international passengers, and elimination of merchant overtime fees and installation of drive-through scanners. New schemes like Direct Port Delivery, DPD, for imports and Direct Port Entry, DPE, for exports are facilitating faster clearances at the ports. Upgradation of port infrastructure, putting up new scanners at ports, development of robust risk-based measures, and introduction of new port community system at all major ports have led to improvement in average dwell time at seaports. New initiatives like Turant for Customs will make customs clearance faster and faceless. In a recently released UN Global Survey on Digital and Sustainable Trade Facilitation 2019, India has not only improved its overall trade facilitation score from 69% to 80%, but also outperformed other countries in the Asia-Pacific and South and Southwest Asia region. BRICS Bank. Together with the process of globalization, world regional forces have also been asserting their power through different sort of alignments. The Fortaleza Declaration of Heads of State, late July 2014, from Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the BRICS countries, is another such attempt. Creation of a BRICS Bank I, New Development Bank, NDB. Major highlights about the bank are as given below. 1. The bank will have initial subscribed capital of $50 billion, equally shared by the 5 nations. 2. The capital base is to be used for funding infrastructure and sustainable development projects in the BRICS countries initially. 3. Other low and middle-income countries will be able to get funding as time progresses. 4. A contingent reserve arrangement, CRA, of $100 billion is to be also created to provide additional liquidity protection to member nations during balance of payments problems. 5. The CRA is being funded 41% by China, 18% each from Brazil, India, and Russia, and 5% from South Africa. 6. CRA, according to the declaration, is a framework for the provision of currency swaps in response to actual or potential short-term balance of payments pressures. More than the establishment of the NDB, the Fortaleza Declaration is remarkable for adoption of one nation one vote prescription for the proposed bank. The Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund have structures that are not equitable. As per the experts, two factors have triggered the birth of the NDB. One, BRICS have emerged as a big economic power and solidified their ties in terms of commerce with the emerging market economies and developing countries, EMDCs, and they are a force to reckon with in the global economy. Two, their disenchantment with the Bretton Woods institutions has been growing over the years. Two statements of the Fortaleza Declaration make the situation more clear. 1. We are confronted with persistent political instability and conflict in various global hotspots and non-conventional emerging threats. On the other hand, international governance structures designed within a different power configuration show increasingly evident signs of losing legitimacy and effectiveness as transitional and ad hoc arrangements become increasingly prevalent, often at the expense of multilateralism. 2. We believe the BRICS are an important force for incremental change and reform of current institutions towards more representative and equitable governance, capable of generating more inclusive global growth and fostering a stable, peaceful and prosperous world. The BRICS Bank development comes at a time when reforms at the Bretton Woods institutions fail to fructify for one reason or the other, and with the US and European nations still not reconciled to concede BRICS nations a greater voice in the governance structure of the Bretton Woods institutions. Whether the BRICS-sponsored NDB will be a fitting alternative to the Bretton Woods twin depends on a host of factors. Major ones of these factors, among others, are its ability, 1. To put in place a conflict resolution mechanism, 2. To devise a robust credit appraisal mechanism, and 3. To put in place an effective supervisory regime. The BRICS-sponsored Development Bank is not an isolated and unique initiative. Similar initiatives had sprung up in the past to blunt the might of Bretton Woods twin. Development Bank of Latin America, created by Andean nations in the 1960s as the Chiang Mai Initiative in early 2000s of 10 ASEAN nations plus China, South Korea and Japan, to establish a network of bilateral currency swap pacts in the wake of Asian currency crisis, and the establishment of the Bank of South by Latin American countries in 2009 were the result of escalating dissatisfaction with the US-dominated IMF and World Bank. India and the NDB. India is supposed to be the biggest beneficiary of the bank. This looks quite possible as certain priorities of India well match with the priorities and lending provisions of the bank, such as the bank aims at prioritizing environmentally sustainable projects. 75% of its funds dedicated to this cause alone, while India is working today on world's biggest plan of promoting green energy through multiple means. By March 2020, India had availed a total fund of $3.4 billion to promote projects across a variety of sectors, renewable and green energy, transportation, roads and bridges, etc., with several projects in the pipeline of approval for funding. Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, was officially launched in 2014 by China with 21 Asian nations as the founding members. By March 2019, the bank had a total of 93 members from across the world, inclusive of the 23 prospective members. Still, the USA, Japan and Canada have not joined it. Rather, the experts suggested them to support it, especially when the existing mechanism, the World Bank and Asian Development Bank, is not able to cater to the infrastructural needs of the continent. The AIIB is aimed at providing finance to infrastructure projects in the Asia region as a multilateral institution. It is planned to operate broadly in the same manner as existing multilateral development banks, MDBs, such as the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank, ADB. While much of the debate is centered on whether the AIIB will complement or compete with existing organizations, it is intended to be more a commercial bank with nations as shareholders than a purely development aid institution. The AIIB will start with an authorized capital base of $1 billion to be enhanced to $100 billion. Experts have termed it as a rival for the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the World Bank, WB, and the Asian Development Bank, ADB, which are regarded as dominated by developed countries like the United States. The United Nations has addressed the launch of the AIIB as scaling up financing for sustainable development and for the concern of global economic governance. As per the experts and analysts, there are several factors which are behind such an initiative coming from China. Major ones are as given below. 1. The Chinese government has been frustrated with what it regards as the slow pace of reforms and governance, and wants greater input in global established institutions like the IMF, World Bank, and Asian Development Bank, which it claims are dominated by American, European, and Japanese interests. 2. The ADB, a Manila-based regional development bank designed to facilitate economic development in Asia, estimated in a report that developing Asian countries have an infrastructure demand of about $2.5 trillion for roads and railroads, $1.1 trillion for telecommunications, and $0.4 trillion for water and sanitation investments. 3. Oxford Economics reported that by 2025, the region will constitute 60% of global infrastructure investment, with China's share alone is expected to increase from around 22% to 36% over the next decade. 4. Despite the significant economic growth enjoyed by countries such as China, India, and South Korea in recent decades, many countries among the developing Asian regions are still mired in poverty, suffering from a profound lack of access to modern-day necessities such as sanitation, a reliable power grid, and adequate transportation and communications networks. 5. It is believed that the new bank could allow Chinese capital to finance these projects and allow it a greater role to play in the economic development of the region commensurate with its growing economic and political clout. Size of the AIIB, based on the lending capital ratios of the World Bank and European Development Bank, the AIIB could extend loans for infrastructure spending at around 100% to 175% of its subscribed capital. This would mean having outstanding loans of up to $175 billion. With public-private partnerships and increased subscriptions, considerably larger amounts could be leveraged for projects in the future. By March 2020, the bank had promoted 48 infrastructure projects across Asia with a total investment capital of $8.2 billion. An edge to China. The bank is supposed to give China an edge in the global economy. Major ones are: 1. The AIIB will be a better way for China to deploy its massive foreign exchange reserves, which are currently earning next to nothing in US Treasury bonds. China believes that the commercial financing of infrastructure differentiates the AIIB from the likes of the ADB, which places a greater emphasis on poverty reduction. 2. The AIIB also supports China's strategic interests in its hugely ambitious Silk Road economic belt policy. 3. By exporting technology, transferring development know-how, and facilitating industrialization using Chinese long-term finance to the underdeveloped economies, China will not only find a bigger market, promote prosperity of all nations along the Belt and Road, but also diversify its foreign asset portfolio. 4. It will make China emerge a much bigger global power player, which is supposed to be keen to challenge America's long-established strategy of institutionalizing power in a rules-based order. The case of the AIIB shows that China now seeks to define this order for itself, with the battle for influence in Asia increasingly fought through rules and institutions. 5. The so-called rules-based order was set up after the Second World War through policies such as the Bretton Woods Agreement, which established US-dominated organizations such as the World Bank and IMF, in which China plays a very small role. India and AIIB. India is one of the 21 founding members of the bank and is believed to benefit maximum from it. India holds 8.6794% of its shares, with a total investment of $8.3673 billion and avails a 7.614% voting rights, with a total of 86,214 shares in it. India's shareholding is the second highest after China, which holds 30.8913% shares. India is presently the largest borrower of the bank. For diverse projects, it had borrowed a total of $5.1 billion till March 2020, with many more infra projects in the pipeline of consideration for financial support. Unlike most other multilateral development banks set up by developed countries, AIIB is the first major multilateral development bank where principal contributors are the borrowing members themselves. Reforming IMF and WB. Demand for suitable reforms in the Bretton Woods institutions, International Monetary Fund, IMF, and World Bank, WB, is long overdue. Majority of the experts believe that the disillusionment from the delay in reforming them led the emerging market economies to look into alternatives, and the outcome was the creation of the two new international financial institutions, the AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and NDB, New Development Bank. The biggest hurdle in the path of reforms, the USA, at last came in favor of reforms by early 2017, after the G20 summit on it had already commenced, London, 2016. The major reforms proposed in the IMF and WB are as briefed below. 1. Reforms in the IMF. Proposal of a far-reaching reform of the IMF in order to restoring its legitimacy and effectiveness so that it can help member nations fight immediate and future crises, touching the following areas. Increasing its resource base so that it is able to help out, bail out in case of balance of payment situations, nations in times of crisis. G20 wishes to increase its resources from the current level of US $750 billion. It should be remembered that just after the subprime crisis of 2008, the WB had estimated the resource shortfall of up to $700 billion in 2009 alone. Merit-based selection of the head of the IMF, irrespective of nationality. Eliminating the veto of the US in key decisions. Broadening the application of double majority voting as a way to increase the role of smaller members. Revising the rule of quota and vote distribution to reflect accurately and fairly the current and future economic weight of the members. Transforming its board of directors from a bureaucratic body to a high-level policy decision-making forum of ministers. 2. Reforms in the WB. In case of the WB, the following reforms have been proposed. Need of shareholders to replenish the capital base for soft loans, While the IDA disburses interest-free, the IBRD disburses concessional loans to the eligible member nations, and in recent years the WB has faced a resource crunch as several developed countries, especially the USA, proposed fund cuts. Merit-based selection of the World Bank president, without regard to nationality. Revamping of shareholdings and voting rights in the executive boards, to give a greater voice to emerging market economies and to borrowers. Overhauling its operational modalities, so that it can react with less bureaucratic and time-consuming burdens to the legitimate needs of its borrowers. It is believed that the successful launching and operation of the AIIB and NDB played an instrumental role in expediting the process of deliberations on reforming the IMF and WB. For reforms to take place, the US and Europe will need to move away from their long-held positions towards these institutions, which looks a bit difficult, as nations have their own priorities to support the moves towards reforms.